They say the people who hurt you the most are the ones you never saw coming. I learned that lesson in the cruelest way possible when I returned from what was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, a Mediterranean cruise celebrating my 68th birthday, only to find a foreclosure notice nailed to the front door of my beach house. The home I had paid off 15 years ago. The home my late husband and I had dreamed about since we were newlyweds. My son had taken out a loan against it. $300,000. And when I called him, desperate for answers, his wife answered instead. She laughed. Actually laughed. "You should have seen this coming. Helen," she said, "you were always too trusting for your own good. But here's what Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me start from the beginning. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from right now. What time is it where you are? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might relate, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Now, back to 3 weeks before everything fell apart. I was standing on the deck of a cruise ship somewhere between Barcelona and the Italian coast, watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean in shades of orange and gold. The air was warm and salty, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. My friend Barbara had convinced me to take this trip. "You deserve it, Helen," she'd said. "You spent 40 years crunching numbers for other people. Time to live a little." She was right. I had spent my entire adult life as a certified public accountant. Started as a junior bookkeeper at a small firm in Raleigh right out of college, worked my way up, eventually opened my own practice. I handled taxes and finances for hundreds of clients over the decades. Teachers, small business owners, doctors, lawyers. I helped them plan for retirement, save for their children's education, protect their assets. The irony of what happened to me is not lost on me. By the time I retired 5 years ago, I had done well for myself. Nothing extravagant, but comfortable. My husband Richard and I had bought our beach house in the Outer Banks back in 1995. It was a modest place then, just a 2-bedroom cottage with a wraparound porch and a view of the ocean that took your breath away. Over the years, we renovated it, added a 3rd bedroom, updated the kitchen, built a deck where we'd sit every evening watching the waves. Richard passed away 7 years ago. Heart attack. Quick, the doctor said, like that was supposed to be a comfort. After he was gone, the beach house became my sanctuary. I split my time between my condo in Raleigh and the coast, but the beach house was where I felt closest to him, where I could still smell his cologne on his old fishing jacket, where I could sit on our deck and pretend he was just inside making coffee. My son Derek was our only child. We had him late in life. I was 35 when he was born, and Richard was 40. We poured everything into that boy. Private schools, baseball camps, a college education at Duke. He was smart, charming, the kind of kid who could talk his way into or out of anything. He met Victoria during his senior year. She was beautiful, ambitious, came from a wealthy family in Charlotte. I remember thinking she seemed a bit cold at their wedding, a bit calculating, but I told myself I was being an overprotective mother. Derek loved her. That was what mattered. They had 2 children together. My grandchildren, Emma and Lucas, the lights of my life. Emma was 12 now, serious and thoughtful, with her father's eyes. Lucas was 8, all energy and mischief, with a laugh that could fill any room. But over the past few years, something had changed in my son. He seemed stressed, distant. He and Victoria had opened a restaurant in Charlotte 3 years ago. Farm to table, very trendy. Derek had left his stable job in banking to pursue this dream, and Victoria had convinced him to invest heavily. Their savings, loans from friends, and apparently, money from places I didn't know about. The restaurant struggled from the start. I offered to help, to look at their books, to give them advice. I was an accountant, after all. But Victoria always brushed me off. "We've got it handled, Helen. Don't worry about us." Those words would come back to haunt me. The cruise was supposed to be 2 weeks. 2 weeks of good food, beautiful scenery, and no responsibilities. Barbara and I had planned it for months. We visited Rome, Athens, the Greek islands. I took hundreds of photos. I bought little gifts for my grandchildren, a snow globe from Santorini for Emma, a wooden boat from Mykonos for Lucas. I remember sitting in a cafe in Dubrovnik, writing postcards, feeling grateful for my life. I had my health, my home, my family. What more could anyone ask for? The flight home was long and exhausting. By the time I landed in Raleigh and drove to the coast, it was late afternoon. I was tired but happy, already looking forward to unpacking, making a cup of tea, and watching the sunset from my deck. But when I pulled into my driveway, something felt wrong. There was a white paper attached to my front door. From a distance, it looked official, governmental. My stomach tightened as I walked closer. The words hit me like a physical blow. Notice of foreclosure. Failure to make mortgage payments. Property to be seized. Mortgage payments? I didn't have a mortgage. I had paid off this house 15 years ago. There had to be some mistake. I fumbled for my phone and called the number on the notice. After 20 minutes on hold, I finally reached someone who could explain what had happened. Ma'am, according to our records, you refinanced this property 8 months ago, a home equity loan for $300,000. No payments have been made in 4 months. The balance, plus penalties and fees, is now $342,000. I refinanced? I said, my voice shaking. I never refinanced anything. I've never taken a loan against this house in my life. The representative was patient, but confused. Ma'am, we have the signed documents. Your signature, notarized and verified. The loan was processed through standard channels. My signature, someone had forged my signature. I ended the call and stood there, staring at that notice, my mind racing. Then, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, I remembered something. 2 years ago, before Derek and Victoria opened the restaurant, Derek had asked me to sign some paperwork. Just updating your emergency contacts and beneficiaries, Mom. Standard stuff. Victoria had prepared the documents. I'd signed them at their kitchen table while the grandchildren played in the next room. I hadn't read them carefully. Why would I? He was my son. My hands trembled as I dialed Derek's number. It rang 4 times before Victoria answered. Helen, she said, her voice flat. I was wondering when you'd call. Victoria, I need to speak to Derek. There's a foreclosure notice on my beach house. Someone took out a loan in my name. Yes, she said simply. We did. The world seemed to tilt. What do you mean? You did. How is that possible? The power of attorney. You signed. It gave Derek authority to make financial decisions on your behalf. We needed the money, Helen. The restaurant was failing. We had investors threatening to sue. Derek's reputation was on the line. I never signed a power of attorney, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I remembered that stack of papers at their kitchen table, my son's reassuring smile. Just sign here, Mom. And here. One more. Yes, you did, Victoria said coolly. And it's all perfectly legal. Our attorney verified everything. Your attorney. Not a neutral party. Someone who would tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. Where's Derek? I demanded. I want to talk to my son. He's not available right now. He's dealing with the fallout from our business. The restaurant closed last month. We lost everything. Well, almost everything. The implication hung in the air. They hadn't lost everything because they had taken what was mine. Victoria, that house is all I have. It's worth over $700,000. You took out a loan against my property without my knowledge, and now I'm about to lose it. You'll be fine, Helen. You have your condo in Raleigh. You have your retirement savings. This is just a house. We needed the money more than you do. You're 68 years old. How much longer are you really going to be using a beach house anyway? The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. How much longer was I going to be using it? As long as I was alive. As long as I could walk. That house was my connection to Richard, to our life together, to 40 years of memories. This isn't over, I said quietly. Victoria laughed. That same cold laugh I'd noticed at her wedding years ago. What are you going to do, Helen? Sue your own son? Take us to court? We have legal documentation. We have your signature. And frankly, No one is going to believe that a 68-year-old woman didn't know what she was signing. They'll say you're confused, forgetful, maybe even senile. I'm a CPA, I said. I spent 40 years reading legal documents. I know exactly what I signed and what I didn't sign. Then you should have been more careful, shouldn't you? Victoria's voice dripped with contempt. Goodbye, Helen. Don't call again. The line went dead. I stood on my porch, the foreclosure notice crumpling in my hand, and felt something shift inside me. The shock was fading, replaced by something colder, harder. Victoria thought she'd won. She thought I was just a foolish old woman who would cry for a bit and then accept my fate. But she'd made a critical mistake. She'd underestimated me. I'd spent 4 decades in finance. I knew how money moved. I knew how documents worked. I knew how to find fraud when someone was hiding it. And I knew people who could help me. I walked back to my car, got in, and drove straight to Raleigh. I had work to do. The next morning, I sat in the office of my old friend and attorney, Margaret Sullivan. We had known each other for 30 years. I'd done her taxes. She'd handled my will after Richard died. I trusted her completely. She listened without interrupting, as I told her everything. When I finished, her expression was grim but determined. Helen, she said, what they did wasn't just wrong. It was criminal. Forging a power of attorney. Using it to take out a loan against property you own free and clear, that's fraud. That's elder abuse. And in North Carolina, that's a felony. Can I get my house back? That's the goal. But I need to be honest with you. The lending company is an innocent party here. They processed what appeared to be legitimate documents. Getting the loan voided is going to require proving that the entire transaction was fraudulent from the start. I can prove it, I said. I know exactly what I signed 2 years ago, and it wasn't a power of attorney. Then we need to find those original documents. Do you have copies? No, I admitted. Victoria took them after I signed. She said she'd file them with their estate planner. Margaret made a note. We'll subpoena them. In the meantime, I'm bringing in a forensic document examiner and a private investigator. If Derek and Victoria forged your signature on a power of attorney, there will be evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, my living room became a command center. Margaret worked tirelessly, filing motions, contacting the lending company, preparing our case. The forensic document examiner, a meticulous man named Dr. Robert Chen, analyzed the signatures on the loan documents and compared them to samples of my actual signature from decades of tax returns and legal documents. The results were damning. The signature on the power of attorney is definitely not yours, Dr. Chen told me. It's a good forgery, careful and practiced, but there are telltale differences. The way you cross your T's, the loop in your H, the pressure patterns. Someone studied your signature and tried to copy it, but they didn't have the muscle memory. The private investigator, Sandra Williams, dug into Derek and Victoria's finances. What she found made me sick. The restaurant had been hemorrhaging money from day one, Sandra reported, but that's not the worst of it. Victoria had been moving funds into a separate account for months before they closed. Over $100,000 that Derek doesn't seem to know about. And she's been making payments on a condo in Florida. In her name only. She's been planning this, I said. Not just stealing from me. She's been setting up an exit strategy. It gets worse, Sandra continued. I found evidence that Victoria convinced Derek to invest heavily in cryptocurrency about 2 years ago. They lost over $80,000 when the market crashed. The restaurant was supposed to be their recovery plan, but it just dug the hole deeper. I closed my eyes. My son, my foolish, trusting son. Victoria had been manipulating him for years, and he'd been too blind to see it. What about the $300,000 from my house? Where did it go? Sandra handed me a report. About $150,000 went to restaurant debts and investor payoffs. $50,000 went to credit card debt. And the rest? Cash withdrawals, transfers to Victoria's hidden accounts, and payments I can't trace. My guess is gambling or more bad investments. $300,000. My security. My home. Gone in 8 months. I didn't try to contact Derek during those 2 weeks. Margaret advised against it, and frankly, I wasn't sure I could speak to him without breaking down, but I thought about him constantly. The little boy who'd brought me dandelions from the backyard. the teenager who'd mowed lawns all summer to buy his first car, the young man who'd cried at his father's funeral and promised to always take care of me. Where had that person gone? Victoria, I could understand. She was a predator. Cold, calculating, driven by greed. But Derek was my son. My blood. How could he have let this happen? The day we filed our lawsuit, I felt something I hadn't felt since coming home from that cruise. Hope. We filed for an emergency injunction to stop the foreclosure, Margaret explained. We're also filing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. And we're suing for full recovery of all stolen funds plus damages. What happens now? Now we wait for a court date. But Helen, I need to prepare you for something. When we go to court, you're going to see your son. You're going to have to testify against him. This is going to be painful. He made his choice, I said quietly. Now he has to live with it. The court date came 6 weeks later. I barely slept the night before. Barbara drove me to the courthouse because my hands were shaking too badly to hold a steering wheel. When I walked into that courtroom, Derek was already there with Victoria. He looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. When he saw me, he started to rise from his seat, but Victoria's hand clamped down on his arm and pulled him back. Their attorney was a slick young man named Bradford Hayes. He was all confidence and expensive suits, but I'd seen his type before. All style, no substance. Margaret presented our case methodically. The forged power of attorney, the unauthorized loan, the forensic signature analysis, the financial investigation showing where the money had gone. Dr. Chen testified about the forgery. Sandra testified about the hidden accounts and the cryptocurrency losses. When it was my turn to take the stand, I told my story simply and honestly. I described the documents Derek had asked me to sign 2 years ago. I explained that I believed I was updating emergency contacts, not granting financial power of attorney. I detailed the shock of finding the foreclosure notice, the phone call with Victoria, the months of investigation. The opposing attorney tried to rattle me during cross-examination. Mrs. Mitchell, you're 68 years old, correct? Yes. And at 68, would you say your memory is as sharp as it was when you were younger? I looked him directly in the eye. Young man, I spent 40 years as a certified public accountant. I managed millions of dollars for hundreds of clients without a single error. I can still do complex tax calculations in my head. My memory is excellent. A few jurors smiled. The attorney shifted uncomfortably. Isn't it possible you simply forgot signing the power of attorney? I never signed a power of attorney. I signed documents that were misrepresented to me by my own son and his wife. That's not forgetfulness. That's fraud. He tried a few more angles, but I didn't waver. Finally, he dismissed me. Then Victoria took the stand. She was composed, sympathetic, even tearful at moments. She claimed they'd been desperate, that the restaurant's failure had pushed them to the brink. She said Derek had told her the power of attorney was legitimate, that she'd never suspected any wrongdoing. But Margaret tore her apart on cross-examination. Mrs. Mitchell, you testified that you believed the power of attorney was legitimate. Is that correct? Yes. Margaret held up a document. Then can you explain this email you sent to a Florida real estate agent 2 weeks before the loan was processed? The one where you wrote, quote, "The beach house money should be coming through soon. The old woman doesn't suspect a thing," end quote. Victoria's face went white. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. That was taken out of context. Margaret continued. Can you also explain why you purchased tracing paper, a signature stamp kit, and a book titled Mastering Document Replication 3 months before the loan documents were signed? I don't recall those purchases. Margaret showed the receipts to the jury. We have your credit card statements right here, Mrs. Mitchell. Would you like me to read the items again? Victoria had no response. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the charge of fraud, how do you find? We find in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of forgery, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of elder abuse, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The foreclosure was voided. The loan was declared null and void. Victoria and Derek were ordered to repay all remaining funds, approximately $110,000 plus damages. Criminal charges were referred to the district attorney. But the moment I remember most from that day wasn't the verdict. It was afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, when Derek finally approached me alone. Victoria was with their attorney, probably discussing damage control. "Mom," Derek said, his voice breaking. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what she was planning. She told me you'd agreed to help us. She showed me the documents. I trusted her. I looked at my son. This man I had raised, loved, sacrificed for, and I saw the truth in his eyes. He was weak, foolish, easily manipulated. But he wasn't evil. Not like Victoria. You should have come to me," I said. "You should have talked to me directly instead of letting your wife handle everything. I would have helped you, Derek. I would have given you money if you'd asked, but you let her steal from me instead." "I know," he whispered. "I know. I'll never forgive myself. That's between you and your conscience," I said. "But Derek, understand something. This marriage of yours, it's over. Victoria has been planning to leave you for months. She has hidden accounts, a condo in Florida, an exit strategy. You were just a tool to her." The color drained from his face. "What? Ask her about the condo in Naples. Ask her about the account at First Coastal Bank. See what she says." I walked away, leaving him standing there, his world crumbling around him. 3 months later, Derek filed for divorce. Victoria tried to flee to Florida, but the criminal charges kept her in state. She was eventually sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud and elder abuse. Derek received 2 years of probation, community service, and court-ordered financial counseling. The judge took into account that he'd been manipulated by his wife and had cooperated fully with the investigation once he learned the truth. As for me, I got my beach house back. It took some time to sort out the legal paperwork, but eventually, the lien was removed and the property was mine again, free and clear. The lending company, which had been an innocent victim of the fraud, worked with my attorney to resolve everything. The day I moved back in, I stood on my deck watching the sunset, just as I had thousands of times before. The house felt different now. Scarred, somehow. Violated, but still mine. I didn't speak to Derek for 6 months after the trial. I needed time to heal, time to forgive, time to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, we could have going forward. But I never cut off my grandchildren. Emma and Lucas had done nothing wrong. They were victims too, caught in the crossfire of adult failures. They stayed with Derek after the divorce, and I made sure they knew that Grandma's door was always open. The first time Emma visited me at the beach house after everything happened, she was nervous, uncertain. "Grandma," she said quietly, "are you still mad at Dad?" I thought about that question for a long moment. "I'm disappointed in him," I said honestly. "He made terrible choices. But he's trying to do better now. And I still love him. I just need time to trust him again." She nodded, seeming to understand. Then she hugged me, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than hurt. Derek eventually reached out with a letter. Not an email, not a text. A handwritten letter, pages long, explaining everything. How Victoria had controlled their finances from the beginning of the marriage. How she'd convinced him that borrowing from his mother was the only way to save their family. How stupid and blind he'd been. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for a chance. A chance to prove he'd changed. A chance to rebuild what he'd destroyed. I read that letter 3 times. Then I called him. We met for coffee at a little diner in Nag's Head, neutral territory. He looked better than he had at the trial. Still thin, but less haunted. He'd gotten a job at a small accounting firm in Durham. Ironic, considering he'd married the daughter of wealth and ended up following in his mother's footsteps after all. "I'm not ready to forgive you completely," I told him. "What happened broke something in me. Broke something in us." "I know," he said, "and I understand. I'm not asking for everything to go back to normal. I just want a chance to be your son again, to prove that I'm not the person I was when I was with her. It's going to take time. I have time. However long it takes." We finished our coffee. We talked about the grandchildren, about his new job, about nothing and everything. It wasn't comfortable, but it was a start. That was 2 years ago. Today, I'm 70 years old. I still split my time between Raleigh and my beach house. Derek visits once a month with the kids. Our relationship isn't what it was before, but it's healing, slowly, carefully, like a broken bone that needs to be set just right. Victoria got out of prison after 18 months for good behavior. Last I heard, she'd moved to Arizona and was working at a car dealership. I don't think about her often. She's not worth the energy. What I think about instead is what I learned from all of this. That trust is precious and fragile, and shouldn't be given blindly, not even to family. That age doesn't make you weak or foolish, and anyone who thinks it does is in for a surprise. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And that sometimes the people who hurt you most can still find their way back, if they're willing to do the work. I thought losing my beach house would destroy me. Instead, it taught me how strong I really am. Victoria saw an old woman with valuable property and assumed I'd be an easy target. She didn't see the 40 years of experience, the sharp mind, the determination that had carried me through every challenge in my life. I hope my story helps someone else out there. Maybe you're dealing with a family member who's taking advantage of you. Maybe you're afraid to fight back because it's family and fighting family feels wrong. But here's what I learned. Family isn't just blood. Family is respect. Family is trust. And when someone violates that trust, even if they share your DNA, you have every right to hold them accountable. I want to thank you all for listening to my story. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself? How did you handle it? Drop your stories in the comments below, and if this resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of standing up for what's right. Remember, being kind doesn't mean being a pushover. Being family doesn't mean accepting abuse. And being older definitely doesn't mean being helpless. I'm 70 years old. I fought back against my own son and daughter-in-law. I won my home back. And I'm still here, still standing, still me. If I can do it, so can you.